Welcome to Uncloseted Conversations. Even if you stumbled upon this channel by accident, you are welcome here. The stories here are from my heart, from my soul, from my pen to your ears. I hope that you will stay a little longer and open yourself to the magic of storytelling. Here I write fiction, and though not always aligning with reality, it still tugs at heartstrings. Stories are escapes and sometimes a balm to the soul. So, enjoy your time here, and if reality presses down too loud and too hard, come knock at the door, come in, take a seat, grab a coffee, and just exhale. These are veil-bound stories, and the space is free and non-judgmental. Sit back, earphones or pods in, and let's listen to another exquisite romance. The Confluence. Blood, stone, and a city built in harmony. Chapter 1. Concrete and Covens. The air in the Bayside Delft didn't just smell like salt and sea, it smelled like progress, ozone, and the faint, metallic tang of a dwarf-run forge. Nemeth Tamara stood at the edge of the Monarch Heights site, her boots caked in the kind of gray mud that only existed in a city built on a ley line. She adjusted her hard hat, her dark hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked structural. In her hand, a tablet flickered with the structural blueprints for a new library, one designed to hold both digital servers and ancient, sentient scrolls that tended to catch fire if the humidity wasn't exactly 42%. "I don't care if it's a full moon," Merrick, Nemeth said, not looking up from the screen. "The concrete pour for the foundation starts at 6 o'clock. If your crew is too busy howling at the sky to handle a mixer, I'll find a team of trolls who'd love the overtime." Merrick, a foreman who stood 6'5" and smelled perpetually of pine needles and damp fur, growled a low, vibrating sound that would have sent a normal human running for the highlands. Nemeth finally looked up. Her eyes weren't glowing, she refused to let them, but there was a steady, unyielding iron in her gaze that made the werewolf blink first. "Boss, the Union is touchy about lunar cycles," Merrick grumbled, though his posture shifted from alpha to employee in a heartbeat. "The Union is touchy because they want a 3-day weekend," Nemeth countered, tapping a pen against her clipboard. "Remind them that Monarch Limited pays for their silver-free safety gear and their premium medical. Now, get the dampeners on the crane. The nymphs in the pond next door are complaining about the vibrations again, and I am not dealing with another localized flood today because someone's aura was disturbed." She turned on her heel, walking through the skeletal frame of the building. This was her kingdom. Not one of crowns and velvet, but of rebar and calculated risks. Her great-great-grandfather had been a warlord who carved this piece out of blood. Nemeth preferred to maintain it with city ordinances and high-grade steel. Deep in her chest, she felt a familiar, itchy warmth. It was the gift, the raw, chaotic magic of her coven bloodline. It whispered that she could just will the concrete to set, or sense the exact stress point in the steel without a calculator. She pushed it down, burying it under layers of logic and mathematics. "I'm a builder," she whispered to herself, the mantra of a woman who chose her own destiny. Not a fucking miracle worker. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An email notification from a private architectural consultant. Subject: Bayside Delft Project, Preliminary Critique. Nemeth scoffed, clicking it open as she stepped into her mobile office trailer. The load-bearing calculations for the East Wing are technically proficient, but aesthetically stagnant. It lacks the breadth of the surrounding landscape. Please see the attached revisions. IB. Nemeth stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. Aesthetically stagnant? Who the hell does IB think they are? I don't need breath, I need a fucking building that doesn't fall down when a dragon flies too low. She slammed her laptop shut. She didn't have time for anonymous architects with fancy initials. She had a city to finish, a legacy to protect, and a very large cup of black coffee to consume before the sun went down. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. If Orkburn smelled like wet concrete and possibilities, the Eugen Palace smelled like old money, dying lilies, and a suffocating amount of incense. Isabella Teruko Barunai sat perfectly still as a stylist fussed over the heavy, gold-threaded silk of her ceremonial robes. To the world, she was the third princess of the Yugen dynasty, a silent, poised figurehead meant to be seen and eventually traded like a rare piece of art. But beneath the heavy embroidery, her left hand was cramping. She had spent the last 4 hours hunched over a tablet hidden in a hollowed-out book of ancient lineage records, redrawing the cantilevered balcony for a library in the Bayside Delph. "Your Highness, your posture," the stylist tooted, pulling a corset string that made Isabella's lungs protest. "My posture is a reflection of my boredom, Alara," Isabella remarked, her voice clipped and cool. "If I sit any straighter, I'll snap. The king and queen expect perfection today. The delegation from the Southern Isles arrives at noon. There are rumors of a proposal." Isabella's eyes, sharp and dark, flickered toward the vanity mirror. "A proposal? How vintage of them. Do they think I'm a structural asset to be annexed?" She waited until the stylist moved to the other side of the room before sliding her tablet out. She had an unread notification. A reply from N. Tamara, CEO, Monarch Limited. To IT subject, Bayside Delph project, preliminary critique. I don't build breath. I build structures that survive the atmospheric pressure of 3 different sentient species living in one district. Your revisions would require a reinforcement of the subflooring that is neither cost-effective nor physically possible without magic. And we don't use magic on my sites. Stick to your sketches and leave the physics to the professionals. N.T. Isabella's lips quirked into a sharp, dangerous smirk. Physics to the professionals? "Oh, you stubborn, monochromatic bore," she whispered. She tapped a quick, scathing reply, her fingers flying over the glass. "N.T., if you find my physics impossible, perhaps the issue isn't the design, but the limited imagination of the engineer. I've attached the stress test simulations for a carbon-reinforced weave. It's not magic, it's materials science. Try to keep up." "I'd be." Isabella. The heavy oak doors swung open. Her mother, the queen, swept in, a whirlwind of sapphire silk and expectations. "The Zoom call with the council is starting. Put that device away. You are a princess of Yugen, not a, whatever it is you do on that screen." Isabella stood, the weight of her robes feeling like lead. She tucked the tablet into its hiding spot, her face smoothing into a mask of regal indifference. "I am simply reviewing the legacy of our kingdom, Mother," Isabella said, her tone dripping with a sarcasm that went entirely over the queen's head. "Good. Because your 21st birthday is in 3 days. The world will be watching. You represent the stability of our line." Isabella followed her mother out, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floors. Stability was just another word for stagnation. Her family wanted a statue. What they were going to get was an architect who was currently calculating how much dynamite it would take to bring down the palace's western load-bearing wall. She had one foot in a dying dynasty and the other in a city she had only ever seen through a lens. She was done being a structural asset. It was time to show them what happens when a foundation is pushed past its breaking point. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The Yugen Palace was draped in banners of gold and crimson. It was Isabella's 21st birthday, the age of accession. In the eyes of the dynasty, she was finally ripe for a political merger. Isabella stood on the balcony of the Great Hall, looking out at the city lights of the neighboring capital. Her laptop was open on a marble pedestal, disguised by a floral arrangement. She was mid-argument with an electrical contractor in Orkburn while her mother's voice droned on in the background about Prince Cyril of the Northern Reach. "He has a vast territory, Isabella. Mineral rights that would triple our treasury," the queen said, sipping a glass of nectar. "He also has the personality of a damp sponge and a documented history of accidentally banishing his assistants to the Shadow Realm," Isabella muttered, her fingers flying across the keys. She wasn't looking at minerals, she was looking at the structural integrity of the Bayside Delph's new pier. Isabella. Look at me. Isabella closed the laptop with a sharp snap. She turned, her royal gown shimmering like dragon scales. Mother, I have spent 21 years being a representation of stability. I have studied the history, I have worn the corsets, and I have smiled at every dullard with a title who crossed this threshold. And now it is time to secure the legacy, her father, the king, added as he stepped into the room. The marriage contract is drawn. You will sign it tonight before the gala. Isabella felt a cold, sharp calm settle over her. This was the moment the foundation cracked. No, she said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to trigger a seismic sensor. No, the king repeated, his voice low and dangerous. I don't need a prince to build a legacy. I've already started building one. She reached into the floral arrangement and pulled out her tablet, swiping it onto the large holographic display in the center of the room. Instead of royal portraits, the room was filled with 3D renderings of bridges, high-rises, and the intricate urban planning of the Bayside Delph. I am an architect, Isabella said, her voice ringing with a strength she had spent years tempering. I've been consulting for 3 years. While you were worrying about my marriage prospects, I was helping design the most advanced magical human cohabitation zone in the world. This is madness, the queen whispered. You are a princess of Yugen. I am a woman of the new world, Isabella countered. We live in an age where technology and grit matter more than bloodlines. I'm not going to sit on a throne and watch the world move past us. I'm going to build the world. She didn't wait for their permission. She had already packed a bag, mostly black turtlenecks, a rugged laptop, and a pair of steel-toed boots she'd bought off a dark web auction site. I'm going to Orkburn, she announced, walking toward the door. If you want to extend the kingdom, do it through infrastructure and innovation. I'll send you the invoices. As she stormed out, she pulled her phone from her pocket. She had a meeting at 8 o'clock on a very dusty site with a woman who currently hated her guts via email. See you soon, Auntie, she whispered, a predatory, excited smirk crossing her face. Let's see if you're as tough in person as you are in your professional signatures. Chapter 4. The Dusty Site. The Bayside Delph district was currently a symphony of chaos. A crew of dwarves was jackhammering through a stubborn vein of enchanted quartz, emitting sparks that smelled like burnt cinnamon, while a group of sirens in the harbor were singing rhythmic work shanties to help the crane operators. Nemeth Tamara stood in the center of it all, a smear of grease on her cheek and a yellow safety vest over her black tactical gear. She was losing her patience. The IT-B architect had promised a site visit for the new waterfront pavilion, the centerpiece of the Monarch Limited expansion. If this visionary doesn't show up in 5 minutes, I'm pouring the slab according to my specs, Nemeth growled to Merrick, who was currently trying to keep a disgruntled sprite away from the generator. Give Em a minute, boss. Architects usually like to make an entrance, Merrick said, grinning. At that moment, a sleek, matte black town car, vastly out of place among the mud-caked dump trucks, pulled up to the perimeter fence. The door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she had been carved from obsidian and spite. She was wearing a tailored black suit, oversized sunglasses, and, to Nemeth's surprise, actual steel-toed boots that looked like they'd seen a day or two of work. She didn't wait for an escort. She hopped over a puddle of murky runoff and marched straight up to Nemeth. You're late, Nemeth said, crossing her arms. And you're standing on a live load-bearing sensor. Move 6 inches to the left or the alarm goes off. The woman tilted her sunglasses down, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that flickered over Nemeth with a mix of appraisal and amusement. She moved the 6 inches. Nemeth Tamara. You're shorter than your emails suggest, the woman said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and held a rhythmic lilt that screamed palace education. And you must be IT-B, Nemeth countered, her jaw tightening. Or should I call you your highness? I heard the news. The Yugen princess throwing a tantrum and running away to play in the dirt. Isabella Teruko Barunai didn't flinch. She stepped closer, invading Namitha's personal space until the scent of expensive sandalwood hit Namitha's nose, clashing with the smell of diesel. It wasn't a tantrum, Miss Tamara. It was a career move, Isabella purred. And I don't play in the dirt. I design the foundations that keep your technically proficient boxes from looking like soul-crushing bunkers. Now, show me the reinforcement weave. I want to see if your crew actually followed my specs or if they're still building like it's the Stone Age. Nemeth let out a sharp, dry laugh. Listen, princess. I've been building this city since you were probably still learning how to wave from a carriage. I don't have time to babysit royalty who thinks a vision is more important than structural integrity. This is a dusty, dangerous site. You want to be an architect? Get your hands dirty or get back in the car. Isabella reached out, snatched a stray blueprint from Namitha's clipboard, and began marking it up with a red pen she'd pulled from her pocket like a weapon. I've been getting my hands dirty in secret for 3 years while you were busy being a monochromatic bore in your office, Isabella snapped, shoving the blueprint back at Namitha's chest. That drainage slope is off by 2 degrees. Correct it, or the first time a nymph takes a bath upstairs, your lobby is going to be an indoor pool. Capice? Nemeth looked at the blueprint. The correction was annoyingly accurate. Fucking architects, Nemeth muttered under her breath. I heard that, Isabella smirked, adjusting her sunglasses. And for the record? I prefer Isabella. But you can call me the person who just saved your lobby if that's easier for you. Nemeth stared at her, a dangerous spark of reluctant respect and a heavy dose of irritation igniting in her chest. Fine, Isabella. Welcome to the mud. Try not to break a nail. Try not to bore me to death with your math, Tamara. We have a legacy to build. Chapter 5. Safety Vests and Silk. The humidity in the Bayside Delph was sitting at a staggering 92%, the kind of air that felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket. It was the perfect day to see if a princess would wilt. Nemeth stood atop the half-finished skeletal frame of the east wing, her boots hooked into the steel. Below, the site was a frantic hive. A group of earth elementals were stabilizing the soil, their low humming vibrating through the soles of Namitha's feet. You're still here, Nemeth called out, not turning around as she heard the rhythmic clack-crunch of boots on gravel behind her. I figured the lack of air conditioning and the smell of swamp gas would have sent you back to the palace for a spa day by now. Isabella stepped onto the platform, her movements surprisingly sure-footed for someone who grew up on marble. She had ditched the blazer, her white silk shirt now streaked with a dark line of hydraulic fluid across the shoulder. She was wearing a neon orange safety vest that clashed violently with her royal dignity. The swamp gas is an improvement over the perfume in the court, Tamara, Isabella replied, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a gloved hand. At least the mud is honest. Nemeth turned, leaning against a crane pillar. Honest? Maybe. But it's also heavy. We're having a situation with the foundation. The nymphs are claiming the concrete mix is too alkaline for their localized ecosystem. They've started a sit-in. Or a swim-in. Either way, my pour is stalled. Isabella walked to the edge, looking down at the flooded trench where several shimmering, translucent figures were lounging stubbornly in the muddy water. They're right, Isabella said simply. Nemeth scoffed. Oh, brilliant. The architect is a botanist now. It's basic environmental integration, you stubborn woman, Isabella snapped, turning to face her. If you use that grade of lime-heavy cement, the runoff will turn their sanctuary into a bleach pit. You don't need more rebar, you need a neutralizer. And you need to curve the drainage toward the southeast ley line. That adds 3 days to the schedule and 4 figures to the budget, Nemeth countered, stepping into Isabella's space. I have a contract, Isabella. I build to code, not to feelings. Then your code is archaic, Isabella whispered, her nose inches from Nemeth's. You want to be the woman who built Orkburn? Then build it for everyone. Or are you too scared to admit that a spoiled princess found a flaw in your precious blueprints? Nemeth's jaw tightened. She could feel the gift stirring in her blood, the heat of her coven ancestors wanting to flare up and just fix the problem with a snap of her fingers. She suppressed it, the effort making her voice drop to a dangerous octave. I'm not scared of a flaw, princess. I'm annoyed by the interference. Good. Be annoyed. Use that spite to actually look at the chemistry I sent you. Isabella reached out, her fingers brushing Nemeth's vest as she adjusted the lopsided collar. The touch was brief, but the air between them suddenly felt charged with more than just humidity. You're so busy trying to be human and practical that you're forgetting why your forefathers started this place. It wasn't just for safety. It was for harmony. Isabella pulled back, a smug, sharp smile playing on her lips. I'll be in the trailer. I'm redesigning the filtration system. Try to keep your temper from boiling the tea. Nemeth watched her walk away, noting the way Isabella didn't even flinch when a nearby steam pipe hissed a warning. Merrick! Nemeth yelled over the side of the railing. The werewolf looked up. Yeah, boss. Get the chemistry kit. We're checking the fucking alkalinity. She paused, rubbing the spot on her chest where Isabella had touched her vest. And tell the nymphs we're adjusting the specs. Merrick grinned, showing too many teeth. The princess getting to you tomorrow? She's a pain in my ass, Nemeth muttered, though she didn't look nearly as angry as she sounded. Now move it before I dock your pay for the lunar cycle. Chapter 6. The Language of Blueprints. The clock on the trailer wall ticked past midnight. Outside, the Bayside Delph had shifted into its nocturnal rhythm, the distant howl of a werewolf on watch, the shimmering glow of sprites attracted to the welding sparks. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of two high-powered laptops. Nemeth was hunched over a structural stress test, her glasses sliding down her nose. Isabella was sprawled in the opposite chair, a compass in one hand and a cold slice of pizza in the other. You're doing it again, Isabella murmured, her voice husky with exhaustion. Doing what? Nemeth didn't look up. Designing for a siege. This is a community center, Tamara, not a fallout shelter. You don't need 3 feet of reinforced titanium in the foyer. I designed for reality, Isabella. In this city, reality includes the occasional stray fireball or a troll having a bad day. I'm not building a glass house just so it looks airy for your portfolio. Isabella stood up, walking around the table until she was leaning over Nemeth's shoulder. She pointed to a specific joint in the 3D model. If you use a kinetic dampening weave here, you can lose half the metal and gain 10 feet of natural light. It's elegant. It's efficient. It's breathable. Nemeth finally looked up, her eyes meeting Isabella's. The sarcasm she usually used as a shield felt heavy and clumsy. Why are you so obsessed with light, princess? You grew up in a palace made of gold and windows. Isabella's expression hardened, a flicker of old shadows crossing her face. She pulled back and sat on the edge of the desk, swinging one leg. The palace was a cage, Nemeth. Gold bars are still bars. My parents didn't see an architect. They saw a signature on a marriage contract. Nemeth paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The prince. Cyril, right? I saw the headlines in the International Arcane Ledger. The royal wedding of the century. Cancelled. Isabella let out a sharp, jagged laugh. Cancelled? I didn't just cancel it. I liquidated the dowry. My inheritance was tied up in land and jewels, so I spent my 18th and 19th years moving assets into shell companies. By the time they tried to force my hand on my 21st birthday, I told them if they didn't let me go, I'd leak the Yugen dynasty's offshore tax records to the High Coven Council. Nemeth let out a low whistle. Shit. You blackmailed your own parents. I secured my freedom, Isabella corrected, her eyes flashing with a fierce, cold pride. I told Cyril to his face that if he touched me, I'd redesign his bedroom ceiling to collapse while he slept. He was surprisingly receptive to breaking the engagement after that. Nemeth looked at Isabella, really looked at her. She saw the grit beneath the silk, the steel that matched her own. You're a dangerous woman, Isabella Barunai. And you're a stubborn one, Nemeth Tamara. Isabella leaned in, a slow, predatory smirk returning to her lips. So, are we going to keep arguing about titanium, or are you going to admit my kinetic weave is brilliant? Nemeth felt a pull in her chest that had nothing to do with her coven blood and everything to do with the woman in front of her. She sighed, a small, reluctant smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. It's adequate. I'll run the simulations. But if the foyer collapses, I'm telling everyone the princess did it. Deal, Isabella whispered, her gaze lingering on Nemeth's lips for a second too long before she turned back to her laptop. Now, give me that coffee. It tastes like battery acid, but I need the fuel. Nemeth watched her, the silence in the trailer suddenly feeling much more intimate than it had 5 minutes ago. The blueprints weren't the only things changing in Orkburn. Chapter 7. A Howl in the District. The structural integrity of a city like Orkburn wasn't just about steel and concrete, it was about the delicate social friction between species. When that friction sparked, things tended to get loud. Nemeth was elbow-deep in a junction box on the 3rd floor of the pavilion when the first howl ripped through the evening air. It wasn't the rhythmic, communal howl of a shift change. It was jagged, frantic, a warning. Merrick. Nemeth barked into her radio, clicking the handheld to her belt as she swung over the railing. Boss, we've got a situation at the south gate. Marek's voice crackled, sounding breathless. Some of the younger pack members are getting rowdy. A group of Highland vampires just rolled in for the night market, and someone made a comment about wet dog smell. It's turning into a damn riot. Nemeth cursed, her boots hitting the metal decking with a heavy thud. Before she could take 2 steps toward the lift, Isabella appeared from behind a stack of glass panes, a tablet in one hand and a heavy-duty flashlight in the other. The south gate is a choke point, Isabella said, her eyes wide but her voice steady. If they start throwing cars, that temporary support beam on the overpass won't hold the lateral load. I don't care about the overpass right now, Isabella. I care about my crew not getting their throats ripped out, Nemeth snapped, heading for the stairs. If the overpass collapses, it falls onto the lunar clinic, Isabella countered, matching Nemeth's stride with surprising speed. You handle the brawlers. I'll handle the physics. We need to brace the support or the whole block is going down. Nemeth paused at the top of the stairwell, looking at the princess. Isabella's hair was a mess, her expensive white shirt was ruined, and she was talking about lateral loads during a supernatural turf war. Fine. Don't get eaten, Nemeth grunted. They hit the ground running. The south gate was a chaotic blur of gray fur, pale skin, and flashing police lights. The air was thick with the scent of musk and ancient dust. Nemeth dove into the fray, her presence alone acting as a stabilizer. She didn't use her magic, not yet, but she used the sheer, terrifying authority of a woman who signed everyone's paychecks. Back off. All of you. Nemeth's voice carried over the snarls. She grabbed a young werewolf by the scruff of his neck, hauling him back from a vampire whose fangs were dangerously close to a vein. Merrick, get the silver line zip ties. If anyone else shifts, they're fired before they hit the ground. Meanwhile, Isabella was under the overpass. The structure was groaning, vibrating with every heavy impact from the street above. She looked at the temporary hydraulic jack. It was leaking. Tamara. Isabella screamed over the roar of the crowd. The jack is failing. I need a counterweight or a structural anchor. Nemeth looked over. She saw Isabella leaning her shoulder against a massive steel beam, as if her sheer will could keep the tons of concrete above from crushing the clinic. Nemeth felt the gift surge a hot, electric itch behind her eyes. She looked at the chaos around her, then at Isabella. Logic said she couldn't reach the beam in time. Fuck it, Nemeth thought. She slammed her palms onto the asphalt. She didn't summon a fireball. She reached into the very earth her forefathers had enchanted. She felt the vibrations of the city, the pulse of the Bayside Delph. With a sharp, guttural command in a language that tasted like iron and honey, she forced the ground to rise. A pillar of solid, compressed stone erupted from the street, sliding perfectly beneath the failing overpass, locking into place with a bone-shaking thump. The overpass stopped groaning. The crowd went silent, staring at the woman whose hands were still pressed to the smoking pavement. Isabella stared at the stone pillar, then at Nemeth. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. I thought, you didn't use magic on your sights. Nemeth stood up, wiping her hands on her trousers. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. I don't. That was an emergency structural intervention. It was brilliant, Isabella whispered. She walked toward Nemeth, ignoring the vampires and werewolves who were slowly dispersing. She stopped just inches away, her eyes searching Nemeth's face. And you're a liar, Tamara. You aren't just a builder. You're the heart of this city. Nemeth looked away, her face flushing. The pillar is temporary. You still have to design the permanent fix. I'll have the blueprints by morning, Isabella said, her voice dropping to that low, intimate register again. She reached out, her fingers lingering on Nemeth's arm, grazing the skin just above her glove. But for the record, the magic looked good on you. Nemeth cleared her throat, her chest tight. Go back to the trailer, princess. You've got blood on your vest. Not mine, Isabella smirked, though her hand didn't move from Nemeth's arm. Ready to go home? In a minute, Nemeth said, finally meeting Isabella's gaze. I need a drink. A very strong one. My treat, Isabella replied. I liquidated a prince for moments like this. Chapter 8. Royal Interference. The morning air was crisp, but the atmosphere on the site was suffocating. 3 gold-trimmed armored SUVs were idling at the perimeter fence, their engines purring with a quiet, expensive arrogance that made the construction cranes look like rusted toys. Nemeth stood by the blueprints table, her jaw set. She hadn't slept much after the stone pillar incident, and her coffee was cold. The Yugen crest, Merrick whispered, leaning over to Nemeth. They don't look like they're here to talk about zoning permits, boss. They're not, Nemeth said, watching as a man in a sharp, charcoal suit stepped out, followed by a woman whose sapphire silks dragged through the Orkburn mud without a care. Isabella emerged from the trailer, her hard hat tucked under her arm. She didn't look like a princess, she looked like a woman who had just spent 6 hours recalculating a foundation. Her white shirt was wrinkled, and there was a smudge of graphite on her jaw. Isabella Teruko, the queen's voice rang out, sharp enough to cut through the sound of a nearby saw. Look at you. Covered in, is that grease? Isabella didn't flinch. She walked toward her mother, but she stopped halfway, her posture shifting into something regal yet defiant. It's hydraulic fluid, mother. And it's much easier to wash off than the guilt of a forced marriage. The king stepped forward, his eyes landing on Nemeth. And this must be the employer. The woman who thinks she can harbor a runaway royal and use her for labor. Nemeth didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped up beside Isabella, her shoulder brushing the princess's. The height difference was slight, but Nemeth's presence felt like a mountain of granite. I don't use anyone, Your Majesty, Nemeth said, her voice dropping into that low, dangerous rasp. Isabella is the lead architect on a multi-million-dollar project. She's here because she's the best at what she does. And in Orkburn, we value competence over whatever it is you're wearing. Watch your tongue, commoner, the king hissed. She's not just a commoner, Isabella interrupted, her voice ringing with a sudden, fierce heat. She looked at Nemeth, a smirk playing on her lips that was pure, unfiltered flirtation. She's the only person in this city who can handle my impossible designs without crying. And she's the woman whose legacy is going to outlast your dynasty by 500 years. The queen gasped. You're coming home, Isabella. We have rewritten the contract with Cyril. He is willing to overlook this episode. Isabella laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. She reached out and grabbed Namatha's hand. It was the first time they had touched in front of others, Namatha's rough, calloused palm against Isabella's smooth skin. The electricity was instantaneous. I'm not an episode, Isabella said, leaning into Namatha's side. And I'm not coming back. I have work to do. And after work. She looked up at Namath, her eyes dark and suggestive. I have a very important dinner date with my boss. So, unless you're here to sign a waiver for the dust inhalation, please leave my sight. Namath felt her heart thudding against her ribs. She tightened her grip on Isabella's hand, a protective instinct she couldn't suppress flaring up. You heard the architect. The gate is behind you. Try not to let the gargoyles dent your SUVs on the way out. As the royal convoy peeled away in a cloud of indignant exhaust, the silence on the site was heavy. Isabella didn't let go of Namatha's hand. A dinner date? Namath asked, her voice slightly strained. I don't remember agreeing to that. Isabella turned to her, her face inches away, her eyes dancing with sarcasm and something much deeper. I figured after you saved a building and stood up to a king, you deserved a reward. Plus, I really want to see what you look like without a safety vest. Namath let out a huff of a laugh, her thumb tracing a small circle on the back of Isabella's hand. You're a nightmare, Barunai. The best kind, Isabella whispered. Pick me up at 8. And Namath? Wear the black silk. I know you have it. Chapter 9. The Pivot. The heat in the Bayside Delph had broken, replaced by a relentless, rhythmic rain that turned the site into a soup of gray clay. But inside the main Monarch Limited hub, the temperature was rising for entirely different reasons. A structural flaw had been detected in the central pylon, a microfracture caused by an unexpected shift in the ley lines beneath the district. If they didn't pivot the entire weight distribution within 48 hours, the half-finished pavilion wouldn't just lean, it would implode, taking 3 city blocks of Namatha's family legacy with it. I don't care if the Sims say it's impossible, Isabella. We have to shift the load to the West Pier, Namath growled, her hair falling out of its knot, her eyes bloodshot from caffeine and lack of sleep. If we shift it blindly, we crush the nymph sanctuary, Isabella shot back, leaning over the holographic table. She had been in the same black turtleneck for 30 hours. We need a cantilevered bypass. It's a precision fix, not a sledgehammer one tomorrow. We don't have time for precision. The ground is literal liquid right now. Then use your hands. Isabella snapped, slamming her palm on the table. Stop pretending you're just a girl with a calculator. Stabilize the earth while I rewrite the load-bearing code. Together. Or we both watch the city burn. Namath froze. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the rain drumming on the corrugated roof. She looked at Isabella, at the smudge of ink on her cheek, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, and the way she didn't look at Namath like a warlord's heir, but like a partner. 48 hours, Namath whispered, her voice rough. If we fail, my father's ghost is going to haunt me into the next century. Then let's make sure he stays buried, Isabella murmured, her voice softening as she stepped closer. The next 2 days were a blur of profanity-laced technical debates and high-octane flirting fueled by pure exhaustion. At hour 36, they were sitting on the floor of the trailer, surrounded by discarded coffee cups and crumpled blueprints. You know, Isabella said, her head leaning against the metal wall, most people go for dinner and a movie. We go for structural collapse and caffeine heart palpitations. Namath let out a tired, raspy laugh. You're the one who wanted to build a legacy, princess. This is what it looks like. It's dirty, it's stressful, and it usually involves me wanting to throw you off a crane. And yet, Isabella leaned her head toward Nemeth, their shoulders touching. You haven't thrown me off yet. Is it because you need my brain, or because you like the way I look in a safety vest? Nemeth turned her head. In the dim light of the emergency lamps, Isabella's sarcasm felt like a thin veil over something much more vulnerable. The vest is a disaster, Nemeth whispered, her gaze dropping to Isabella's mouth. But the architect? She's growing on me. Like a particularly stubborn moss. Moss? How romantic, Isabella smirked, but she didn't pull away. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of Nemeth's jaw, lingering on the pulse point that was fluttering far too fast. You're exhausted, Tamara. Your gift is humming so loud I can hear it. It's just the generators, Nemeth lied, her voice trailing off as Isabella leaned in just a fraction more. Liar, Isabella breathed. The tension was snapped by Marek's voice over the intercom. Boss, the ley line has stabilized. The pylon is holding. Nemeth surged to her feet, clearing her throat and adjusting her tactical vest, her face flushed. Back to work, Barunai. We still have 12 hours of bracing to do. Isabella remained on the floor for a moment, a triumphant, wicked grin on her face. 12 hours? Plenty of time for you to admit I'm brilliant, then. In your dreams, princess, Nemeth called back, though the smile on her face was the brightest thing in the room. Chapter 10, Unmasked. The pivot had left the site in a state of precarious triumph, but the Bayside Delph was a living thing, and it didn't like being tamed. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a deceptive, shimmering fog that clung to the steel skeletons of the buildings. Nemeth was on the ground level, barking orders at a team of dwarves who were recalibrating the seismic dampeners. High above, Isabella was on the 14th floor gantry. She was stubborn, insisting on personally inspecting the carbon-reinforced weave she'd fought so hard to implement. Isabella, get down from there. Nemeth yelled, her voice echoing through the hollow structure. The air is too thick with salt. The grip pads on your boots aren't rated for this level of condensation. I'm fine, Tamara. Your concern is as aesthetically stagnant as your original foyer design, Isabella shouted back, her silhouette a sharp, dark line against the gray sky. She leaned out, her tablet out to scan the junction. Then, the world shifted. A rogue pocket of pressurized gas, trapped deep in the ley line below, suddenly vented. The ground didn't just shake, it buckled. A massive support cable, stressed from the 48-hour pivot, snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The gantry groaned, the steel twisting like paper. Isabella. Nemeth watched in slow-motion horror as the platform tilted. Isabella scrambled for a handhold, her boots sliding on the slick metal. She caught the railing, but the entire section was shearing off, plummeting toward the jagged rebar and concrete below. Nemeth didn't think. She didn't calculate the social cost or the political fallout of revealing her heritage to the entire district. She screamed a command in the ancient, guttural tongue of her coven. Her eyes didn't just glow, they ignited with a fierce, violet light that pushed back the fog. She threw her arms upward, her fingers splayed as if catching the weight of the sky itself. The falling gantry stopped midair. It didn't just stop, it froze, suspended in a shimmering web of translucent, amethyst energy. Isabella was clinging to the rail, her eyes wide as she looked down at the street and then at Nemeth. Nemeth's teeth were gritted, blood beginning to trickle from her nose from the sheer strain of holding tons of steel with nothing but her will. With a violent heave, she pulled the energy toward her, guiding the platform onto a stable concrete ledge. The second Isabella's boots hit solid ground, Nemeth let go. The magic vanished, and she collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The site was dead silent. The dwarves, the werewolves, the sirens in the harbor, everyone had seen it. The heir of Orkburn wasn't just a manager, she was a conduit of the old power. Isabella didn't wait for the lift. She practically flew down the emergency ladders, hitting the ground and sprinting toward Nemeth. She skidded into the mud, throwing her arms around Nemeth's shoulders before the engineer could even look up. "You idiot," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. She pulled Nemeth's face toward her, her hands cupping Nemeth's cheeks with a desperate, crushing intimacy. "You absolute, magnificent idiot." Nemeth blinked, her vision blurry. "I told you, the grip pads weren't rated for the salt." Isabella didn't laugh. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against Nemeth's. The scent of sandalwood and rain was overwhelming. "You saved me. You used the gift. In front of everyone." "I wasn't going to let you fall," Nemeth rasped, her hands instinctively finding Isabella's waist, pulling her closer until there wasn't a breath of air between them. "I have too many revisions left to argue with you about." Isabella's gaze dropped to Nemeth's mouth, her thumb brushing the blood from Nemeth's lip. The sarcasm was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying heat. "To hell with the revisions, Tamara." Isabella kissed her. It wasn't a princess's kiss, it was a reclamation. It tasted like salt, iron, and a decade of suppressed longing. Nemeth groaned into the kiss, her fingers digging into the silk of Isabella's shirt, anchoring herself to the only thing that felt real in a world of shifting stone. They were in the middle of a muddy construction site, surrounded by 100 staring employees, but for the first time in their lives, neither of them was thinking about their legacy. They were just two women, finally building something that wasn't made of stone. Nemeth pulled back just an inch, her eyes still glowing faintly. "Does this mean I get to pick the restaurant for that dinner?" Isabella smirked, though her eyes were shining with tears she refused to let fall. "Only if it has a very sturdy floor, darling. I've had enough of heights for one day." Chapter 11. The Gala. If the construction site was Nemeth's cage of iron and mud, the Yugen Winter Gala was Isabella's Hall of Mirrors. The transition was jarring. 2 days after the accident, Nemeth found herself standing in a marble foyer, trading her steel-toed boots for obsidian glass heels that felt like a structural safety hazard. She was wearing the black silk Isabella had requested, a suit tailored so sharply it could have sliced through a steel cable. "You look terrifying," Isabella whispered, appearing at her side. The princess was a vision in architectural gold, her gown structured with rigid, metallic pleats that looked more like armor than evening wear. The High Coven representatives are already whispering about the warlord's heir in their midst. "Let them whisper," Nemeth muttered, her hand instinctively reaching for the tactical belt that wasn't there. Instead, her fingers brushed the silk of her thigh. "I feel like a building without a foundation in this place, Isabella." Isabella reached out, her fingers sliding into Nemeth's, anchoring her. The touch was bold, public, and sent a ripple through the gathered royalty. "I'm your foundation tonight. Just follow my lead and try not to swear at the Archbishop of the Northern Reach. No promises." He's looking at me like I'm a specimen in a jar. The gala was a tactical battlefield. Isabella moved through the crowd with a lethal grace, introducing Nemeth not as a contractor, but as a sovereign peer. Every time a duke or a diplomat tried to talk over Nemeth, Isabella would tilt her head, her voice dripping with a sugary, royal sarcasm that silenced them. Lord Vane," Isabella smiled at a man whose family controlled the marble quarries. "You remember Nemeth, Tamara? She's the one who recently redesigned the Bayside overpass using, what was it, darling?" "Oh, right. Ancient earth-binding magic." The man paled, bowing lower than necessary. By midnight, the heat of the ballroom and the weight of the stairs became too much. Nemeth pulled Isabella toward a secluded balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The air was cold, smelling of frozen jasmine and the distant, familiar salt of the sea. "You did that on purpose," Nemeth said, leaning against the stone railing. "You were marking territory." "I was showing them that the New World isn't just a theory," Isabella replied, stepping into the small space between Nemeth and the wall. The moonlight caught the gold of her dress, making her look like a living flame. And yes, I was marking territory. You saved my life, Nemeth. Did you really think I was going to let these vultures look down on you? Nemeth reached out, her hand tangling in the intricate lace at Isabella's neck. I don't care about the vultures. I care about the fact that I spent 4 hours in a limousine just to get 5 minutes alone with you. Isabella laughed, a low, melodic sound that vibrated against Nemeth's chest. Only 5 minutes? I think we can negotiate for more. Isabella leaned in, her lips grazing Nemeth's ear. I have a private study on the 3rd floor. It has a very sturdy mahogany desk and a lock that hasn't been picked in a century. Are you interested in a site inspection? Nemeth's breath hitched. She pulled Isabella closer, her arm winding around the princess's waist, feeling the heat of her skin through the gold silk. I think I could be persuaded to look at the floor plans. Careful, Tamara, Isabella smirked, her eyes dark and dancing with a beautiful, unrefined mischief. You might find that my aesthetic is a lot more distracting than you anticipated. I'm counting on it, Nemeth whispered, before pulling her into a kiss that tasted of expensive champagne and the absolute, reckless thrill of a legacy being rewritten in real time. Chapter 12: Cracks in the Foundation. The morning after the gala felt like a structural collapse. Nemeth was back in her trailer, but the air wasn't filled with the usual scent of sawdust. It smelled like stale bureaucracy. A courier from the High Coven Council, the governing body that oversaw the magical human treaties of the Bayside Delph, had arrived at dawn. On Nemeth's desk sat a thick, wax-sealed injunction. They're freezing the project, Nemeth said, her voice a low, dangerous vibration. She slammed her fist onto the desk, rattling the coffee mugs. They're citing unauthorized use of high-tier ancestral magic in a public zone. They want to audit Monarch Limited's entire history. Every brick, every spell, every cent. Merrick stood by the door, his ears flattened. They're scared, boss. You showed the whole city that you're not just a girl with a hard hat. You're a warlord's heir who can hold up 10 tons of steel with a blink. The council doesn't like wild cards. It's not just a freeze, a sharp, familiar voice interrupted. Isabella stepped into the trailer, her heels clicking like a countdown on the metal floor. She wasn't wearing her royal gold today. She was in a charcoal gray power suit, her hair slicked back. She looked like she was ready to sue the sun for shining too brightly. It's a hostile takeover disguised as a safety audit, Isabella continued, snatching the injunction from Nemeth's desk. She scanned it with a practiced, cynical eye. My father's fingerprints are all over this. He couldn't drag me back to Yugen, so he's trying to bankrupt the woman who gave me a reason to stay. Nemeth stood up, her eyes flashing violet for a split second. I won't let them touch this company, Isabella. My family built this city from nothing. If the council wants a fight, I'll give them one that'll level their chambers. Isabella stepped into Nemeth's space, her hand landing firmly on Nemeth's chest, right over her thundering heart. Tamara, stop. You use your magic, you prove them right. You become the threat they want you to be. Then what do I do? Sit here and watch them padlock the gates. No, Isabella smirked, a cold, predatory light in her eyes. You let me use my teeth. You're a builder, Nemeth. I'm a princess. And if there's one thing a princess knows how to do, it's weaponize a social contract. Isabella pulled a sleek, silver laptop from her bag. I've spent the last 3 hours digging through the Yugen-Norkburn Trade Treaty of 1842. There's a clause regarding sovereign architectural contribution. Since I am a royal of Yugen and the lead architect, this project is technically a diplomatic gift to the city. If they freeze Monarch Limited, they are technically committing an act of diplomatic aggression against the Yugen dynasty. Nemeth blinked, the anger in her chest shifting into a stunned, breathless admiration. You're going to use your family's own ego against them? I'm going to make it so legally expensive for them to stop us that they'll be begging you to finish the pavilion by Christmas, Isabella purred. She stepped closer, her other hand sliding up Namatha's neck to tangle in the short hairs at the nape. The intimacy was a sharp contrast to the cold legal talk. But it's going to cost you, Tamara. Namatha's hands found Isabella's waist, pulling her flush against her. Oh? And what's the price for a royal legal defense? I want the penthouse, Isabella whispered, her lips brushing Namatha's jaw. In the new building. The one with the reinforced floor and the floor-to-ceiling windows. I want to look out over the city we built while I distract you from your blueprints. Namath let out a rough, needy sound, burying her face in the crook of Isabella's neck. The penthouse is yours. Hell, the whole block is yours if you get these vultures off my back. Deal, Isabella breathed, before pulling Namath into a kiss that was a fierce, possessive promise. Later that afternoon, Isabella stood on the steps of the High Coven Council, flanked by 3 royal lawyers and a very confused Merrick. She didn't just win, she dismantled the injunction in 45 minutes. As she walked back to the site, Namath was waiting by the gate. Is it done? Namath asked. The vultures are gone, Isabella replied, tossing the shredded injunction into a nearby bin. But I think I might have accidentally declared the Bayside Delph a protectorate of my private architectural firm. Hope you don't mind a bit of paperwork. Namath laughed, lifting Isabella off her feet and spinning her around in the middle of the dusty road. I don't give a damn about the paperwork, princess. I just want to get back to work. Good, Isabella smirked, adjusting Namatha's hard hat. Because we have a deadline. And I have a penthouse to decorate. Chapter 13. The Breakthrough. The structural skeleton was finally clothed in glass and stone. The Bayside Pavilion stood as a shimmering defiance of both gravity and tradition. The hostile takeover attempt by the High Coven Council had backfired spectacularly, leaving Monarch limited with more prestige than ever and leaving Namath and Isabella with a deadline that was breathing down their necks. It was 3 a.m. The site was silent, save for the hum of the enchanted street lamps and the distant, rhythmic lap of the harbor waves. Namath was standing on the edge of the newly completed terrace of the penthouse. She wasn't wearing her tactical vest or her hard hat. She was in a simple gray tank top, her arms crossed against the chill, watching the ley lines pulse with a soft violet light beneath the pavement far below. The glass door slid open. Isabella stepped out, draped in a silk robe that looked like liquid moonlight. She held 2 glasses of amber liquid. The seismic dampeners are calibrated, Isabella murmured, handing a glass to Namath. The nymphs have moved back into the fountain. And the council's auditors have officially retreated to their holes. Namath took a sip, the heat of the whiskey blooming in her chest. We actually did it. A week ahead of schedule. I told you, Isabella said, leaning her hip against the railing next to Namath. Precision and breath, Tamara. You provided the bones, I provided the soul. Namath turned, her gaze lingering on Isabella's profile. The sharp, royal edges had softened over the months of mud and late-night blueprints, but the fire was still there. It's not just a building anymore, is it? Isabella turned to meet her eyes. The sarcasm she usually used as a rapier was sheathed. No, it's a statement. To my family, to your coven, and to everyone who thinks the old world is the only way to live. She stepped closer, the space between them humming with the familiar, electric pull. But what happens when the scaffolding comes down, Namath? When there are no more crises to solve or palaces to blackmail? Namath reached out, her hand sliding into the hair at the base of Isabella's neck. Her thumb traced the line of Isabella's jaw, her touch surprisingly gentle for a woman who spent her days breaking stone. I've spent my whole life building things for other people, Namath whispered, her voice a low, rough confession. Protecting a legacy I didn't ask for. Hiding a gift I didn't want. She pulled Isabella flush against her, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. But when I look at this place, I don't see my great-great-grandfather's war. I see a home. And I see the woman I want to share it with. Isabella's breath hitched. She reached up, her fingers digging into the fabric of Nemeth's tank top. You're a terrible flirt, you know that? You use infrastructure as a romantic metaphor. It's all I know, Nemeth smirked, though her eyes were intense, searching Isabella's for an answer. Is it enough? Isabella didn't answer with words. She pulled Nemeth down into a kiss that was slow, deep, and tasted of a shared future. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the construction site. It was a deliberate, quiet claim. It's more than enough, Isabella breathed against her lips, her hands sliding down to Nemeth's waist. But for the record, I'm still picking out the furniture. Your taste in interior design is, well, it's very bunker chic. Nemeth laughed, a genuine, warm sound that echoed over the quiet city. Deal, princess. As long as the bed is reinforced. I know how you like to throw things when you're winning an argument. I don't throw things, Isabella smirked, leading Nemeth back toward the warm glow of the penthouse interior. I strategically reposition them. Now, come inside. We have a grand opening in 48 hours, and I plan on being very distracted until then. Chapter 14. The Final Brick. The grand opening of the Bayside Pavilion wasn't just a ribbon cutting, it was a seismic shift in the power dynamics of the region. The air in Orkburn hummed with a different kind of energy today, not the frantic vibration of jackhammers, but the melodic chime of crystal and the low, respectful murmur of a city seeing its future for the first time. Nemeth stood in the wings of the great glass atrium, tugging at the collar of her formal black tunic. It was embroidered with the silver ironwood leaf of her lineage, a nod to the warlord past she was finally making peace with. You're fidgeting, a voice purred behind her. Nemeth turned. Isabella was a masterpiece of architectural defiance. She wore a gown of structured white silk that mimicked the cantilevered curves of the building they'd built together. Around her neck was a choker of enchanted Yugan sapphires, but on her hip, clipped subtly to a hidden belt, was a small, silver-plated laser measure. I hate crowds, Isabella. I'd rather be in a trench with a broken pipe, Nemeth grunted, though her eyes softened the moment they landed on the princess. Think of it as a structural inspection of the public soul, Isabella said, stepping close enough to straighten Nemeth's collar. Her fingers lingered against Nemeth's throat. And remember, you aren't just the CEO today. You're the woman who made the earth move. The doors swung open. The crowd was a tapestry of the New World, dwarven dignitaries in velvet, vampires in high-collared lace, humans in techwear, and the High Coven Council, looking appropriately sour in the front row. Nemeth walked to the podium. She didn't look at her notes. She looked at the building, the breathable glass, the reinforced stone, the way the light hit the fountain where the nymphs were currently performing a synchronized water dance. My forefathers built Orkburn as a fortress, Nemeth began, her voice steady and resonant, carrying to the very back of the hall. They built it to keep the world out. But today we open a door. This pavilion wasn't built by a single bloodline or a single species. It was built by a partnership of logic and vision. She paused, her gaze finding Isabella in the front row. The princess was smiling, a small, private expression that belonged only to Nemeth. There are those who say that magic and engineering don't mix. That royalty and labor have no common ground, Nemeth continued, her eyes flashing a brief, defiant violet. They're wrong. Stability isn't about standing still. It's about building something strong enough to let everyone inside. She beckoned Isabella forward. The room went silent. This was the moment the diplomats had been dreading, the public confirmation of the Yuga-Norkburn alliance. Isabella stepped onto the dais, her hand sliding naturally into Nemeth's. They didn't just shake hands, they stood shoulder to shoulder, a unified front of grit and grace. As the architect of this project, Isabella said, her voice projecting with royal authority, I officially declare the Bayside Pavilion a sovereign neutral zone. It belongs to the citizens of Orkburn. And as for the Yugen dynasty, she looked directly at the royal envoy in the third row, her smirk sharpening, consider this my formal resignation from the throne. I found a much more interesting legacy to build right here. A gasp rippled through the room, followed by a roar of applause that shook the very glass in the ceiling. As the music began and the crowd surged forward to celebrate, Nemeth leaned into Isabella's ear. You just abdicated on a live magical broadcast. Your mother is probably having a literal stroke right now. Let her, Isabella whispered, her arm winding around Nemeth's waist. I've spent 21 years being a princess. I'd much rather be a partner. Now, quit being a monochromatic bore and dance with me tomorrow. The floor is reinforced, remember. Nemeth laughed, pulling Isabella into the center of the hall. I remember. And for the record, you're still a nightmare, Barunai. And you're still a stubborn, brilliant architect's favorite project, Isabella countered, before kissing her in front of every camera and council member in the city. The final brick hadn't been laid in the wall. It had been laid in the foundation of a life they were finally free to live. Chapter 15. A New Dynasty. The dust of the grand opening had settled, replaced by the organized hum of a shared office. The gold-lettered sign on the frosted glass door didn't say Monarch Limited anymore. It read, Nemeth and Barunai, Integrated Infrastructure. It was 6 months after the Bayside Pavilion had opened its doors. The firm was currently juggling 3 new contracts, a geothermal power plant run by mountain trolls, a vertical garden for the Nymph Quarter, and a residential spire that looked suspiciously like a Yugen palace, but with better air circulation. As Isabella insisted, Nemeth sat at a massive mahogany desk, the very one Isabella had negotiated for, poring over a site map. She wasn't wearing a suit today. She was back in her black tactical gear, though she'd added a silk scarf Isabella had gifted her, tucked into her collar. The dwarves are complaining about the vibration sensors again, Nemeth muttered, not looking up as the door clicked shut. They say the frequency is interfering with their underground resonance. Then tell them to recalibrate their ears, Isabella replied, dropping a stack of architectural renders onto the desk. She looked radiant, her hair shorter now, a practical bob that caught the afternoon sun. Or tell them if they don't stop whining, I'll redesign their canteen to have open-concept ceilings. They hate those. Nemeth looked up, a slow smirk spreading across her face. You're a cruel woman, Barunai. I'm a woman who meets deadlines tomorrow. There's a difference. Isabella leaned over the desk, her fingers walking across the map until they touched Nemeth's hand. And I'm a woman who is officially off the clock in 10 minutes. Nemeth pulled her closer, her arm winding around Isabella's waist. The office was quiet, the staff having long since learned that the final 10 minutes of the day were consultation time, a polite euphemism for the 2 CEOs being hopelessly in love. We have a meeting with the High Coven tomorrow, Nemeth reminded her, her voice dropping into that low, gravelly register. They want us to consult on the new ley line terminal. They're actually asking for your aesthetic now. Of course they are. They realized that a city that looks like a prison is harder to rule than one that looks like a dream, Isabella whispered, her lips grazing Nemeth's temple. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I want to test the structural integrity of the balcony in the penthouse. I think the wind resistance needs a personal assessment. Nemeth laughed, the sound deep and grounded. You and your structural assessments. You just want to see if you can get me to use my gift to chill the wine again. It's efficient, Nemeth. Why wait for a fridge when you have ancestral ice magic in your veins? I'm an engineer, not a kitchen appliance, Nemeth grumbled, though she was already standing up, catching Isabella's hand and leading her toward the door. As they walked through the office, passing the framed photos of their first, dusty site, meeting, and the shard of the stone pillar Nemeth had summoned, it was clear that they hadn't just built a company. They had built a sanctuary, one where a princess could be a rebel and a warlord's heir could be a creator. "You know," Isabella said as they stepped into the private lift, "my father sent another letter today. He wants to know if we'd consider a contract for the Yugen capital's new transit system." Nemeth raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him our rates for royalty are double," Isabella smirked, leaning back against the lift wall. "And that he'd have to personally apologize to my partner before I'd even look at the blueprints." Nemeth pulled her into a kiss, fierce and protective. "I love the way you negotiate, princess." "I know you do," Isabella breathed against her lips. "Now let's go home. I think I heard something about you thanking me." Chapter 16. Reservations at 7. The sun was sinking into the bayside Delph, painting the skyline in bruised purples and electric golds, a palette Isabella had insisted on when they'd tinted the glass of their sanctuary. The penthouse was a masterclass in their combined souls. Exposed concrete walls, a nod to Nemeth's rugged pragmatism, were softened by hanging moss gardens and tapestries of Yugen silk. In the center of the living area sat a low, oversized velvet sofa, sturdy enough to survive a literal earthquake, yet comfortable enough to make a princess forget her royal posture. Nemeth stood at the kitchen island, her tactical gear replaced by a crisp, white button-down with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She was humming a low, ancient Hungarian tune her grandmother had taught her, the sound vibrating in the quiet room. She poured 2 glasses of a vintage red that cost more than a small crane, her eyes tracking the clock. 6:15 p.m. The silence was broken by the sharp, rhythmic trill of her phone. She picked it up, a small, knowing smirk tugging at her lips before she even saw the caller ID. "How's the meeting?" Nemeth asked, her voice dropping into that low, affectionate rasp. On the other end, there was a heavy, dramatic sigh, followed by the sound of a heavy oak door slamming shut. "I want to stab everyone," Isabella replied instantly. Her voice was muffled, likely because she was pacing a marble hallway in the High Coven's executive wing. "If I have to listen to one more council member explain to me why a public fountain shouldn't have sentient water, I am going to lose my royal composure and start a physical altercation." Nemeth let out a huff of a laugh, leaning her hip against the counter. She could picture it perfectly. Isabella in a sharp suit, her eyes flashing with a lethal combination of architectural genius and repressed princess rage. "Darling, try not to get blood on your dress today." "We have reservations at 7, Nemeth said, her tone mock serious. "Fine, just this one time, for you," Isabella smirked into the phone. The frustration in her voice melted, replaced by that velvet purr that always made Nemeth's pulse skip. "But I'm charging the council a mental anguish fee on the next invoice." "Is the wine open?" Breathing as we speak, Nemeth murmured. "And I've already put the do not disturb ward on the front door. Not even a rogue sprite is getting through tonight." "Perfect. I'm in the car. 10 minutes. Drive fast, princess. I don't like waiting for my architect. I'm the one with the Ducati tomorrow. You're the one who drives a truck like a grandmother. See you soon." Nemeth hung up, a genuine, private smile warming her face. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. Below, the lights of Orkburn were blinking on, a testament to the peace her ancestors had dreamt of and the beauty she and Isabella had actually built. She felt the gift humming beneath her skin, not as a weapon, but as a steady, quiet warmth. She reached out and touched the glass, a tiny spark of violet light dancing at her fingertip, just enough to catch the reflection of the woman who no longer had to hide who she was. A few minutes later, the private lift chimed. The doors slid open, and Isabella stepped out, kicking off her heels before she even cleared the threshold. She looked exhausted, her hair slightly mussed, but the moment her eyes met Nemeth's, the weight of the world seemed to drop away. Stabbing postponed? Nemeth asked, walking toward her. Indefinitely, Isabella breathed, wrapping her arms around Nemeth's neck and pulling her into a kiss that tasted of home. As long as I'm with my favorite engineer. Good, Nemeth whispered against her lips. Because the table is booked, the city is quiet, and I have absolutely no intention of talking about blueprints for the rest of the night. Finally, Isabella smirked, leaning her head on Nemeth's shoulder. A design I can actually get behind. Epilogue, the ripple effect, a view from the pier. The Bayside Delph was no longer just a district, it had become a heartbeat. Nemeth and Isabella stood on the observation deck of the new transit hub, a sleek spire of glass and enchanted iron that connected the rugged borders of Orkburn to the once stagnant outskirts of the Yugen dynasty. Below them, the change was visible in every shadow and every light. Look at the harbor, Isabella murmured, leaning her weight against the railing. A year ago, those siren shanties were sung in secret so the harbor master wouldn't find them for sonic pollution. Now, they're part of the official city rhythm. She pointed to a group of Yugen merchants, men who used to scoff at anything that wasn't stamped with a royal seal, now haggling animatedly with a group of dwarven miners over the price of heat-treated stone. The rigid gold-threaded robes of the palace were being replaced by Bayside functional, silk blended with industrial fibers, a fashion trend that Isabella had accidentally started. It's not just the clothes, Nemeth noted, her eyes tracking a young werewolf and a human student sitting together at a cafe, sharing a plate of pastries and a tablet full of architectural sketches. It's the silence. Or rather, the lack of it. In the distance, the once oppressive border towers of the Yugen dynasty had been converted into light beacons. They no longer housed archers meant to keep the beasts of Orkburn at bay. Instead, they were equipped with the long-range signal technology Isabella had introduced, acting as hubs for the digital network that now linked the two cities. My father's latest report says the Yugen treasury is up 40%, Isabella smirked, a sharp, satisfied glint in her eyes. He still hates that I'm a common builder, but he loves the tax revenue from the new trade routes. It's amazing how quickly tradition buckles when it's presented with a better profit margin. The High Coven is the same, Nemeth added, leaning back. They stopped trying to audit my magic the moment they realized I could help them stabilize the city's ancient irrigation system without charging them a miracle fee. They're trading their dusty scrolls for tablets and structural sensors. The traditional orders hadn't just been defied, they had been rendered obsolete. The New World wasn't a rebellion anymore, it was the status quo. We broke the mold, Tamara, Isabella said, turning to face Nemeth. She reached out, her fingers catching the silver leaf pin on Nemeth's lapel. People don't look at us and see a scandal anymore. They see a template. Nemeth caught Isabella's hand, her thumb grazing the princess's knuckles. A template for what? More swearing and caffeine-fueled arguments. For a legacy that actually breathes, Isabella whispered. Looking out over the sprawling, glowing union of their two worlds, Nemeth realized the construction was finally finished. They weren't just two women who fell in love on a dusty site. They were the architects of a piece that was as solid as concrete and as fluid as a spell. I think your great-great-grandfather would have hated the glass walls, Isabella joked, nodding toward the transparent skyline. Maybe, Nemeth laughed, pulling Isabella closer as the city lights twinkled like a sea of stars below. But he would have respected the grit it took to build them. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.